Thank you. So the UX of tutorial. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Dominic Gelineau. I work for Gameloft Montreal. I started out as a UI programmer, then became a game designer, and I am now a user experience designer. For the past 5 years, I've built tutorials for these 3 games, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll cover the basics of tutorials, the user experience of it, mostly testing, and then the right mindset you have to build a great tutorial. So you can use the word tutorial, onboarding experience, first-time user experience. It all means the same to me, but I think onboarding experience is most used for apps, but it doesn't really matter. Basically, it's the first few minutes you get to spend with your user. It's a super critical moment because it has a huge impact on day one retention. And since you want to keep your user as much as possible into your game, you need to focus on that first moment. When I talk about tutorial, I like to talk about holding the hand. So the user comes into your game, and then you're holding his hand, showing him around in your game. And these first few steps needs to be super clear. The user needs to know what to do at all time. Needs to feel safe. And like it was talked in the previous talk, if you could perform it in any language, because the user don't read, it would be even better. There's different level of hand holding. If you take, for example, Clash Royale, they don't force the user to do anything. They just make him focus on what his next action should be. But their game is kind of simple. There's one action phase, and then one game mode, and then there's a few menus. The user cannot really get lost, so it works for them. If your game is more complex, it has a lot of menus, the user can get lost, then it might be okay to force the user to do actions. But if we were talking about hand holding, at some point you have to let go. And that's a very crucial moment. If the user really feels it, it can be a major turning point. The user might leave because he's been told what to do before, and now he's left alone in your game and he doesn't know what to do. So you have to be very careful about that moment. It needs to be as painless as possible and as seamless as possible. A very good example for that is Final Fantasy 15, A New Empire by Machine Zone. When you do the objective in that game, you trigger tutorials that have about like 4 steps. And when you start the game, they make you do all 4 steps. But as you progress through the game, they make you do less and less steps. At the end, when you're leveled up and you've been in the game for a few days, they just open up the menu for you, and the user knows what to do because he's been doing it all along. So he never sees that there was a separation. Also, other good concept to know for building tutorial, front-loading and contextual tutorial. Front-loading is about showing everything up front. When you have core concept that you want your user to really know to play the game, you can force the user to do them at the beginning, but you have to be careful not to bore your user or overwhelm them with information. The other thing is contextual tutorial. So these small tutorial happen at key moment in your game. So let's say you unlock a new game mode, and then you want to teach the user how to play it, or he finds a new item, and you want to tell him what it's used for. So you can use a smart tutorial at some point. And then to build a great first-time user experience, you might want to use a mix of those two, depending on what your game is. So to move on to the UX part of it, the first thing you have to know is that you know nothing. You think you know a lot, but you mostly assume what you, and you might build a tutorial for you and not for the user itself. So as an example for that, when I was working on Dungeon Hunter 5, I had built the first tutorial, and then later on during the updates, we said we wanted to improve on that, so we built a second one. And from the user opinions, we thought that the tutorial was too long, so we decided to make it shorter, cut on some steps, and just make it shorter in general. And we pushed it. It felt like a good thing, and it seemed like a logical thing to do, but the numbers showed that it wasn't. Same amount of players finished the tutorial, but since it was shorter, they didn't engage as much as the longer tutorial, and then the retention numbers after that went down. Problem was that we couldn't go back to the old tutorial at that point, but I'll talk more about that later on. So to overcome the fact that you know nothing, you need to test everything. So that's the UX part of it, is that you're gonna check with your user if what you're doing is right. So there's two types of tests, qualitative tests and quantitative tests. Yep. So for qualitative tests, I'm talking about playtest. This is kind of easy to do. You just get players to play your game, and then you see how they react to it. You can do this just by having players come to your office, or there's a platform out there where you could do it in the cloud also. It's very useful. You should do it during production. Like every 2-3 months, you should play test your game, and as fast as possible too, because it really makes you focus on what the player needs to know. Like we did it on the game I'm working on right now, and we really found that one area, the power-up system, users didn't understand it properly. So we really focused on that. It's really good for getting insights, and testing if something is really understood. But you have to be careful when engaging with your user, when asking them questions, not to ask them opinions. Like, let's say, well, how do you like the tutorial? Like, nobody's going to say they like the tutorial. But and they might not even know what a tutorial is. For them, it might mean something totally different. So you should rather ask them questions about if they understood some concept, or ask them to redo tasks that you've shown in the tutorial. If they can get it, then you probably did right. So qualitative test is about insight. Quantitative test is about data. So you check if you did right with data afterwards. But before we go into it, I have to go over quality of traffic, because it impacts how you should test your game. So quality of traffic means that as the time goes by, the quality of user you get into your game decrease. So a user that comes into your game at day one will be of higher quality than 2 years after you launch your game. So you can see that with like, if you did nothing in your game, your retention would normally decrease. Your KPIs would normally decrease. What that means for testing is that you cannot test something one after the other. So you cannot do a version 1 of the tutorial in update 1 and then a version 2 in update 2, because you won't be able to put them on the same scale to see which one performed better. This means you need to do A/B test. So I find A/B test funny, because right now, like when I'm working, it's like the solution for everything. Like if you don't know anything, if you don't know something, you just say, we'll A/B test it. But not everything is good for A/B testing. Like if you have something that matters, that impacts the player after 1 year, it's going to be pretty hard to A/B test. But for a tutorial, since it's like the beginning of the game, the day 1 and day 0 of the user, it works really well. So what you do is you build 2 versions in the same build, and then you assign a different version to the user randomly. There's systems to do that, but like if you really want to get right to it, you just assign them randomly. Like half the player will get version A, and then half the player will get version B. And after that, you check for retention. Like for tutorial, the metric to look for is retention. One tip when you're building a A/B test is to make very different version. Just don't just change the color of a button or change a word or a sentence here and there. That won't be enough. Make very different version, like one that starts in the action phase, one that's in the menu, one that is very, very long. Because it takes a long time to build a tutorial, it also takes a lot of time to analyze the data. And if your change is too small, it might they might be statistically insignificant. If it's like 0.3% retention after for day 7 retention, it might be something else. It might be in the margin of error. So now we're moving on to the mindset you have to be in to build tutorial. You have to be in a mindset of change and of testing stuff, and you have to tell your team about it upfront. What that's how it's gonna happen, because if you tell them, oh, we're building this tutorial and that's the end of it, when you're going to go back and try to change it, they won't want they'll feel bad about it. But if you told them from the first time that I don't have all the answer, we're going to test, and then we're going to build different version all the time, then it's going to go better when you're going to ask for a new version. So you need to be able to build new version fast. The frameworks needs to be versatile, and it might take a bit longer in the beginning to do, but after that it's going to go faster to make A/B tests. Like the framework we built is based on Excel at Gameloft, and I can basically do a tutorial all by myself. So it speeds up the process really fast. And yeah, last slide is give yourself the chance to fail. It's okay, you're going to be testing stuff anyway. And since you're doing A/B tests, it doesn't really matter if you fail, because one of the versions is going to succeed. It's going to be better than the other one. And if you keep on testing, you'll always be testing against a version. So you always have a backup. So you're not in the position I was in Dungeon Hunter 5, where we made a new version, but then we couldn't go back to the old one, which was better. So if you do A/B tests, you'll be able to just, okay, no, B is wrong. We'll just keep on A, and then we do C. Okay, C is wrong. D, okay, D is better. So if you keep doing it, you'll succeed at some point, and then you'll improve your retention numbers. And that was it.
And as usual, questions? Yes.
Thank you. You said at one point that you can basically build a tutorial by yourself, and I don't believe you. How do you design the game around keeping the tutorial in mind from the beginning? Because
keeping the tutorial what?
Designing the game around the fact that you're going to have a tutorial at some point. Because if you come in at a later stage, like I did, for example, and they ask you to build a tutorial, then it's a huge thing to change everything to make it work.
Yeah. Well, since we talked about playtesting early. So if you put your game in the hands of user early, then like the first version we did that, it was just an action phase, didn't really need something. But when we added the meta into it, the core loop and everything, the user pretty much needed a tutorial at that point. So we knew from the beginning that we were going to build a tutorial very fast, and it was going to be in, and we knew we were going to do A/B tests. So right from the start, we built the framework correctly. But yeah, I'm also a programmer, so it's like if I need like a little tweak, I can go in and do it also. But yeah.